thanks to everyone for coming to this year's Friends of India speaker. I'm Brian Collins. I'm the current chair of the Friends of India board, and what the Friends of India do is raise awareness about India at the college level and at the community level here in Athens through talks like this one and through travel funding and through our annual Indo-American Friendship Day, which happens in October, November. But in the spring, for the last, I think since the late 90s, been bringing in an outside scholar to give a talk on some aspect of Indian philosophy and religion for the general public. This year, I invited Christa Schwind, who has been practicing yoga, teaching yoga, and doing a dissertation about yoga and appearing on panels at the American Academy of Religion about yoga more recently. So I invited Christa because her perspective is a unique one from both within and outside of the tradition of North American modern-day yoga, as most of us might know it. But today, we're going to have a more complicated picture of what yoga is we might know it might actually mean. And so without further ado, please welcome Christa Schwind to Ohio University.
All right, get started. So, in 2012, the Yoga in America study issued by Yoga Journal reported that 20.4 million American adults, or 8.7% of all U.S. adults, practice yoga. In addition, 104.4 million adults, or 44.4% of the population, indicated they were interested in trying yoga, which is an increase of 470% from 2008. In the last 6 years alone, yoga has grown 30% in the U.S. Not only is yoga popular in America, it also exists as a social discourse. A discourse because it has to do with the ways that humans communicate with one another, and social because communication now occurs between large groups of people. The social discourse of yoga in America also exists in transaction. I define transaction in terms of consumer capitalism, or transactions of money, historical and present-day transnational interaction, and the inherent power dynamics of colonialism and neocolonialism, and as a practice that is intimately linked to bodies in action across space and place. Furthermore, technology is shaping the transactions of social discourse between reified media messages and the user-generated content of social media. This platform of exchange has changed the ways that we produce, share, and thereby define ideas of what yoga is, was, and what it stands for. My primary question today is, what does the branding of yoga celebrities, and or styles, the lifestyle consumption of yoga, and the relationship of yoga to commodification say about the definition and ownership of yoga in America? For the W's print campaign, Tara Stiles is depicted in bridge pose, wearing a leather miniskirt and surrounded by champagne bottles. This visual of yoga displays how yoga in America cannot be separated from the media and its advertising of brand-created messages and or definitions of yoga. Tara Stiles, a formal model and now celebrity yogi, claims to be the first person to put yoga videos on YouTube. She now has over 4 million hits. She also says that her goal is to, quote, make yoga fun and less rigid than it has been for the last 50 years. She has been called a yoga rebel and is quoted as saying, forget about Zen and start feeling fabulous. Today, she has her own style of yoga, Strala, that she calls, quote, a movement that ignites freedom. She also says that she took out the word yoga a few years ago and nobody noticed. She says she promotes yoga with a more pragmatic goal of health rather than by referencing Indian traditions and philosophy. She is not only a yoga celebrity, but she also has links to Oprah and Chopra, is sponsored by Reebok and the W Hotel. The global brand leader of W Hotels, Paul James, states, quote, the W guest has a true work hard, play hard mentality and wants to look fabulous while having fun and getting fit. Through our partnership with Tara Stiles, we've created an energetic program designed to celebrate the body and provide 24/7 access to an interactive workout that can easily be incorporated into the busiest of jet-setting lifestyles. So, is yoga in America simply a hashtagable fitness routine and or buzzword that stands for the celebration of athletic-looking branded white bodies that commodify an ancient practice? Is the purpose of yoga to be fit and glamorous? Is yoga in America all cheap commodity and usurpation of tradition? Is it something more? I believe there's a lot more to yoga in America than irreverent displays of consumer culture, or as you see here, the pornification, as it's called, of yoga. However, the consumption, lifestyle branding, and commodified nature of yoga are important to understanding an American yogic identity. What brands Americans consume inform their lifestyle and showcase their identity. For instance, in our culture, having a Mac or a PC, wearing Adidas or Nike, wearing Lululemon or Prana pants says something, not just about the brand, but about the person that's wearing it or using it. In the yoga world, what style you practice also displays your yoga identity. So if you're an Ashtanga yoga, or a power yogi, or an acro yogi, or you go to your local core power, that also says with what kind of yoga you identify with. The mediatized version of yoga in America is gendered as female, raced as white, and classed as middle to upper. I also happen to be all of these things. So my point of view is therefore located within this American mediatized stereotype. It is ethnographic as a spandex-wearing participant in this culture. I am both a practitioner and a teacher, and it is also dictated by my Bachelor's of Science in Advertising and Marketing, and my location as a scholar of yoga and cultural theory. My current mediatized and stereotypical definition of yoga is both reflective of this culture and also needs to be problematized. The social discourse of yoga in America is found in the mass-marketed message, as well as by individual modes of yogic authenticity. Multiple categories of yogic truth and boundary transact with one another in a narrative of overlapping realities, making yoga more than real. Yoga in America is a hyperreal. Baudrillard defines hyperreal, quote, as models of a real without an origin or reality, a radiating synthesis of combinatory models that substitute the signs of the real for the real. It looks like yoga, but is it? Or in other words, yoga in America is like a mashup song that both uses and references the past to reflect the present context, as a series of borrowings, ellipses, and embellishments set to the track of 21st century America. Within music, a mashup is the blending together of multiple songs, creating a layering effect wherein the use of pieces of already existing vocal and instrumental tracks are intentionally interwoven together, and by doing so transformed from their original content to create something new. This process reflects the taking apart or fragmentation of multiple histories and displays the process of splicing them back together in order to appeal to a contemporary American audience. Some of the tracks that are sampled are incredibly familiar to the average American, while others remain foreign or hidden beneath catchy beats. Furthermore, music is fluid by nature and continually building on the past and innovating in the present. So is American yoga. What is created does not fit into dichotomous categories of East and West or religious and secular, but rather a third space is created. Edward Soja defines third space as, quote, attempts to capture what is actually a constantly changing and shifting milieu of ideas, events, appearances, and meanings. In this critical thirding, the original binary choice is not dismissed entirely, but is subjected to a creative process of restructuring that draws selectively and strategically from the two opposing categories to open new alternatives. The past and present of yoga are in tension, as yoga in America exists as a mashup of religious and secular, East and West, authenticity and idealized conception. Tradition and continuity often supplanted here in America by individuality and choice. Jared Farmer argues in his article American Asana that America has replaced India as the center of creativity in yogic reinvention. American yoga is entrepreneurial, it's branded, business-oriented, and marketed for consumption. At the same time, yoga in America is not simply a one-way product of neo-Orientalist commodification, although it can be argued it is that too. It is rather made up of transactions of intentional and unintentional memory and cultural story. Today, yoga in America is also part of our popular culture. David Chittister argues that, quote, at work and at play, human authenticity is at stake in American religion and popular culture, mediated through popular culture as ordinary leisure and or entertainment, but also as human possibility and experimentation. We define ourselves by what we do, our lifestyle, and we showcase this by what we buy, our consumption. In the American culture, it is more about performance than presence and doing than being. At the same time, the lifestyle consumption of yoga in American popular culture is serious. David Chittister also helps us to understand this with his phenomenon or his notion of authentic fakes. Authentic fakes do authentic work. They, quote, generate power and creativity, like Coca-Cola and McDonald's and Disney, by enabling people to reimagine what it is to be a person in a rapidly globalizing human space. This seriousness is found within modes of branded lifestyle and simplified messages, and in the serious work of yogis doing work on the ground, or doing yoga on the ground, rather. Many American yogis are not only dedicated to their personal practice, but also to service projects or seva. The seva programs of popular yoga teachers in America are making a difference in the world. Tiffany Cruikshank hosts a service project in India that helps prevent the trafficking of children. Sean Corn, a famous yogi and activist, started the Global Seva Challenge that has raised over $3.5 million through fundraising. Her Off the Mat program facilitates personal empowerment through leadership trainings, fosters community collaboration, and initiates local and global service projects. The notion of value for whom and to what purpose is tantamount in understanding the definition and seriousness of an American yoga and its social discourse. Notions and images of yoga range from completely exercise and secular-based to spiritual in nature. Today's celebrity yogis display themselves as a brand and a business in the hyper-real social discourse of lifestyle consumption. They are sponsored or have clothing lines, book deals, social media hashtags that deal with their subjective knowledge and their authentic experience of yoga. So I brought some for you guys to just pass around. So this is Tiffany Cruikshank's Optimal Health for a Vibrant Life. Catherine Budig's The Women's Health Big Book of Yoga, which also includes sections on like yoga and sex and yoga for headaches and these types of things. And then Kino McGregor's Ashtanga Yoga. So we'll talk more about Kino too, so I'll just pass it. These brands also bring with them narratives of specific value, rendering located messages rather than larger stories of messy and uneven transactions. Subjective experiences of yoga count as authentic. For instance, Kino McGregor, who's the Ashtanga book there, she's a popular yoga teacher and a serious Ashtangi. She quotes in the Elephant Journal, "I am a bad Ashtangi. I wear small shorts and mascara. I am not a natural blonde. I color my hair and blow dry it, even while I'm in India. I'm also vain, and I love beautiful and sometimes expensive things. I've been called an Ashtanga cheerleader, a slutty yoga teacher, I'm married, a good businesswoman, as if that's a derogatory term for a yoga teacher, and a sellout for fame and fortune. I've figured out how to use social media and build an online presence, dare I say my own brand. I tweet, blog, vlog, and film for my YouTube channel, but I'm also a good Ashtangi. I practice 6 days a week and follow the guidelines for my practice as best I can from my teachers Sri K. Patabi Joyce and R. Sharat Joyce in Mysore. So Kino is a serious yogi, and she's also very American. So I'm just going to share with you guys a quick video of her in Mysore giving a yoga demo.
Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwaraha, Guru Sakshat Parabrahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Akandamandalakaram Vyaptam Yena Characharam Tatpadam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Aneka Janma Samprapta Karma Bandha Vidahine Atmanyana Pradhanena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jnana Shakti Samahruta Tattvamala Vibhushita Jnana Shakti Samahruta Tattvamala Vibhushita Bhukti Mukti Pradahtacha Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Manattaha Shri Jagannatha Matguru Shri Jagadguruhu Madatma Sarvabhutatma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Dhyanamulam Guru Murti Pujamulam Guru Padam Mantramulam Guru Bhakyam Mokshamulam Guru Kripa Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Devo Maheshwaraha Guru
But so yeah, she complicates the picture. She's traveled to India over 12 times and spent 3 months at minimum each time with her guru. She's very serious about yoga, but she's also, like I said, an American. You see her nails, her brand, her blonde hair, all of these things. So yogis, they create, they promote, and they brand their lifestyle on social media. They post to sites such as Facebook, YouTube, or Instagram, and the consumer is involved in these transactions as well. They show their allegiance to the brand through purchases of merchandise, trainings, retreats, and likes on social media. These likes on social media are often also what leads to sponsorships by corporations or bigger brands. This experience is also now not only locatable to, say, the guru and a student, but is beyond face-to-face or personal relationships as it moves into the realm of the virtual. A recent article in Elephant Journal entitled The Yoga Selfie Can Sustain Your Business notes that there are over 8 million photos with the hashtag yoga on Instagram right now. Entrepreneurs have to do more than just what they love. They have to keep the books, cash the checks, and do the marketing that brings in the money, which allows them to keep doing what they love. Your yoga selfie is one of the most powerful forms of authentic marketing, and it costs you absolutely nothing but a few minutes of your day. So here's the graphic, how to take a perfect yoga selfie. So this is on Mind Body Green. So preferably an exotic location, sunset or sunrise if you can. Be original, do the hardest thing you can in your pose. Maybe wear Lululemon yoga pants, put it on Instagram, and here's some ideas for some hashtags you can use so you get your message across. Catherine Budig is also one of the largest yoga brands today, with contracts from Toe Socks, Under Armour, Women's Journal, you guys have that book somewhere around there, and appearances at all of the major yoga festivals. The brand that Budig creates is reflective of her notion of authenticity as rooted in Ashtanga and adapted to quote her image in the yoga world as a teacher whose style is loving, challenging, and accessible all at the same time. Her Toe Socks ads were all done in the nude except for the toe socks. So the whole pornification of yoga, the consumption of yoga, and the seriousness of the teacher are all combined together. The national culture of America is not one of linear traditions or monolithic narratives. Rather, America is a culture of advertising messages and media sound bites. We Americans on average are exposed to 3,000 advertising messages a day and tens of thousands of product options. With so much choice, brand affinity becomes important. A recent study also noted that children in America have the most brand affinity of any children in the world. It is not possible to separate the message from the marketing in an American culture that is heavily mediatized and materialized. Within the world of branding, the most successful brands are those known as lifestyle brands, where the goal is to create a connection and an emotional response for the consumer and offer them an authentic experience. Antonio Marrazza and Stefano Saviolo argue that, quote, lifestyle brands describe who we are, what we believe, what tribe we belong to. They communicate our status and our aspirations. They indicate the way we deal with our life and sometimes reflect our own unconscious. In order for a lifestyle brand to be successful, it must proffer an ideology that resonates with the way in which the consumer lives or would like to live their lives. So I just want to show you the very end of this. So this is an ad for Herbal Essences, the shampoo brand. And it goes through this whole scene with different settings. They're in weddings, they're in alien ships, they're in all these things. And the woman's talking about how much she likes pork, but also how much she likes to tell people she's a vegan. So.
You're basically a porkatarian.
Yeah, well, I don't really like labels.
Except you like to tell people you're vegan.
Well, yeah. That makes me sound like the kind of person who does yoga.
And I want people to think I do yoga.
Be everyone you are. So, to put this in another context, Harold Koda, the curator in charge of the Costume Institute at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, notes when speaking about Ralph Lauren's role in fashion, quote, he has created an American history that never existed. It's through an idealizing lens that he views American social history. He creates an idea that is reflected in every single aspect of its representation. Not only is it a woman in a black cashmere turtleneck and black wool trousers with a black beret, but behind her she is standing in an environment that is contemporary vision of an urbane haute bohemia that supports the dressing at every level, down to what is on the nightstand. The detailing in terms of his constructions of these fantasies is what makes them seem documentary. As Saviolo notes, communication for lifestyle brands is primarily the art of storytelling and inspiration. These stories are like yoga, hyper-real. Not only that, but yoga is not just defined by individual brands, but also beyond individual styles. It is found as a brand in the world of corporate business. The popular yoga chain Core Power provides this example. Core Power's goal is to become the first national yoga chain and to make yoga, quote, accessible and friendly, as well as offering a consistent experience across the chain. As Trevor Tice, the founder of Core Power, states, Howard Schultz, who's the creator of Starbucks, created the coffee culture in America, and we're doing that with yoga. Core Power was founded in 2002 and hopes to have over 100 studios throughout the country by the end of 2015. As Tice notes, Core Power, quote, is not a person, it's a brand. And he adds, quote, we are not there to preach, it's a secular practice. There is no connection to religion. In essence, Core Power represents authenticity in the institutionalization of yoga to the corporate fitness extreme. Every Core Power is built to be similar so that wherever a member goes in the country, they can have the same experience. Tice also makes sure that his students are getting a workout that, quote, kicks your ass. And Core Power's target market is urban professionals 25 to 35 whose goal is physical exercise rather than spiritual. As Core Power has continued to grow, many of its teachers and more experienced students find the restrictions of Core Power limiting and leave to follow other styles or perhaps to invent their own. At a recent teacher training I was giving a talk at, the discussion of Core Power came up and whether it was a good or a bad idea to have this type of big box yoga. 80% of the students in the training had started their practice at Core Power, joking it was their gateway drug to yoga. The idea of who disseminates yoga and how it is disseminated is complicated. Is it better to get the message of yoga out by any means? And in doing so, what do we lose? Thoughts? Krishnamacharya, who is thought of as the father of modern postural yoga, is responsible in many ways for the dissemination of yoga to the West, as well as the creation of kind of a hybrid between East and West. He trained multiple demographics of people, not just young and male, which had tended to be who was doing yoga at the time, as well as people of varying cultural heritages. His famous students, B.K.S. Iyengar, Indra Devi, and Patabi Joyce, all adding to this as they tended to bring yoga to the West and further disseminate the yoga. Krishnamacharya also moved yoga from the idea of it being just a Hindu religion to the notion of spirituality. As one of his students, Patricia Miller, notes, quote, he instructed students to close their eyes and observe the space between their brows. And then he said, think of God, if not God the Son, if not the Son, your parents. Krishnamacharya set only one condition, explains Miller, quote, that we acknowledge a power greater than ourselves. Krishnamacharya's grandson, Kasab Deshakachar, comments that as a master of many philosophical traditions, Krishnamacharya understood that spirituality was different from religion. Religion was one kind of spiritual practice, but it was not the only one. By refusing to open the door to religious discrimination, he opened the door of yoga to everyone. John Friend, who's another famous yoga teacher who started Anusara and then had a big scandal and now has started another form of yoga called Srideva, he notes that Krishnamacharya, quote, placed a focus on the body and emphasis on physical form, making it look beautiful and all, which is great. Krishnamacharya had one foot in the old realm and one foot in the new realm. In the popular American yoga marketplace, yoga capital appeals to as many national consumers as possible, rather than to historical, geographic, or spiritual religious memory. Vincent Miller argues that there are three facts that misdirect this kind of consumer desire of religion. Quote, the decline of traditional social and cultural markers of identity and belonging, the rise of advertising, and the increasing complexity of commercial products. He goes on to argue, quote, consumer desire is similar in form to religious or traditional religious desires. It resembles more profound longings for transcendence, justice, and self-transformation. The consumption of yoga as lifestyle brand has been transformative for the consumer. So here's a blurb from the Huffington Post, how yoga transformed your body. And so it has after class, after a few months, after a few years, and you see things like increased flexibility, improved lung capacity, relief from chronic back pain, stronger bones. So it's doing those things. It's helping people in many ways. At the same time, the novelty of branded bodies and mass consumption in the hyperreal of late capitalism is displayed in America via a symbolic language of subjective authenticity found within a brand experience rather than notions of traditions or historicity. Yoga is also branded and defined by its references in America to health, freedom, accessibility, and individual expression or experience. It is heavily about the body. Buying good or looking good is being good in our culture. This is how yogis create social capital and status. So Bourdieu defines social capital as, quote, membership in a group, which provides each of its members with the backing of the collectivity, an owned capital, a credential, which entitles them to credit in the various senses of the word. These relationships may exist only in the practical state, in material and or symbolic exchanges, which help to maintain them. In a recent article in Style magazine called Looking Like Money, How Wellness Becomes the New Luxury Status, one of the people interviewed for the article quotes, it's like the only acceptable lifestyle brag. Your fitness regimen of choice says a lot about you. And just like there are smart car types and Porsche types, there are yoga types and boot camp types. Exercise has become another arena to compare and contrast your personality and lifestyle with others. In our larger culture as well as our yogic one, we now transact in an experience-based economy. To a certain extent how we experience ourselves and our world is through brands, which then therefore define our authentic identity. There is a direct relationship between the production, the consumption, and the formation of yogic identity in America. We create our notions of authenticity by what we consume in the marketplace of historical, material, and virtual narratives. Our current yogic landscape combines individual choice with modes of branding through either simplification and or branded systemization. Joseph Pine says, it's about being authentic, which is about being true to the self and being true with what you say you are to others. The goal is to help render your brand and yourself in an authentic way that connects with the consumer. Quote, rendering because you have to get your consumers as business people to perceive your offerings as authentic, because there is a basic paradox. No one can have an inauthentic experience, but no business can supply one. Because all businesses are man-made objects, and all business is involved with money, all business is a matter of using machinery, and all those things make something inauthentic. So how do you render authenticity, is the question. Are you rendering authenticity? Consumers buy based in part by what the brand displays about their personal values, their hobbies, or their beliefs. Like, do you eat organic? Do you drink green juices? Do you shop at Whole Foods? These are all these types of questions. Yoga in America reflects a consumptive lifestyle in an atmosphere of subjective reinvention and a merging of profit and purpose. Yoga in America is a brand, a business, and an identity practice. The Business of Yoga Conference, which is a new conference that's now occurring every summer in LA, has sessions including purposeful profit for the yogi entrepreneur and partnering with global brands as a teacher studio or school. There are now talent agencies for yogis, such as Yama Talent in New York, which on their website states, we develop, secure, and manage a variety of opportunities and relationships for our clients, including those in the traditional yoga space, conferences, festivals, masterclasses, workshops, lectures, immersions, intensives, teacher trainings, and retreats, as well as opportunities and relationships in the rapidly diversifying yoga space of mass media. television, film, DVD, publishing, digital, product endorsement, and modeling. As Vincent Miller argues, quote, cultural commodities, like literal products, are characterized by abstraction and reification. They are abstracted from their condition of production and presented as objects valuable in of themselves. While the benefits for practitioners of yoga are undeniable, its normative face in the mediascape often, quote, depoliticizes issues by putting a pleasant face on complex problems. It also reaffirms stereotypes in complicated ways. The social discourse of yoga in America is a multidimensional conversation occurring in new spaces of competing ownership and/or definition. The commodification and specific consumption of yoga in America is a result of multiple notions and desires of what yoga is supposed to be and what it is supposed to do within a located context. Jane Iwamura argues that, quote, we have come to know the spiritual East, namely through mass media representations and channels of consumption. And this also holds true for yoga. So I want to show you guys this video, and then I want to talk about it when we're all done with you guys about this as a social discourse.
All right, everyone, let's get started. Just choose a spot that feels right to you.
Hello. Sorry, excuse me.
Someone's gonna get close. I don't think I've seen you before. Beginners usually take a spot at the front so they can watch me.
Oh, no. I'm pretty familiar with yoga. I'll be okay.
Okay, well, if you need a block or a strap, you just let me know. Everybody's doing great. Gandhi, just toward the ceiling on that up dog, okay?
Oh, do you mean my Urdhva Mukha Svanasana?
No up dog. Don't worry, you'll learn the terminology. Gandhi, you gotta pick up the pace. You're not gonna burn any carbs.
Would you stop looking at my butt?
What? No, I didn't. I'm celibate.
You're right, creep.
You're doing great, but maybe next time try and wear appropriate yoga attire. Okay, maybe a lycra top.
This is a traditional Indian dhoti. I spun it myself.
Right. There's a Lululemon down the street.
Is this Coldplay? Yep. This is definitely Coldplay.
I'm on a juiced fast,
Cool. Oh, you're fasting. What for? To protest imperialism?
beach season.
Beach season.
Right, let's keep it down. This is a place of quiet reflection.
I'm pretty sure this is a crunch gym. There's a guy giving out sports drinks right there.
You look thirsty.
Are you kidding me? This is a Yankee Candle. Cinnamon bun.
With all due respect, Mahatma, I am a certified yoga instructor.
Oh, really? Who was your guru? Carl Smith. What an honorable yogi.
I really want to try a yoga Lattes class.
Oh my god, that is so spiritual.
Bitch, you do realize this is my actual religion, right? I will give anyone $10 if they can tell me who this is. Anyone? No, I didn't think so. It's Krishna, 8th incarnation of Lord Vishnu. Learn it. Why is it so fucking hot in here?
We're doing Bikram yoga.
Well, you know, in my day, we did a traditional form of yoga where the room was normal and you didn't sweat your balls off.
You seem stressed. Just take a breath and flow your chakras down into your heart center.
So.
What the fuck? Never mind.
Yeah, we'll talk about that at the end, or I'd like to talk with you guys about that. But yes, I feel like that has a lot of social commentary that can be discussed. So the depiction and understanding of yoga in America is clearly problematic and rife with issues of commodification, trivialization, and neo-Orientalism. This issue is also evident in the examples of Deepak Chopra and Lululemon. Asim Shukla of the American Hindu Foundation states in an article entitled "The Theft of Yoga," quote, Chopra is perhaps the most prominent exponent of how to deconstruct, repackage, and sell Hindu philosophy without calling it Hindu. Deepak Chopra has made a fortune by combining a variety of Eastern and Western modes of philosophy and science into a mashup consumable for American understanding. He has written 75 books, which is crazy, with titles including Perfect Health and Self-Power, and his newest book, The Future of God, where he basically talks about the notion of Brahman without ever bringing up that topic or that term. Chopra legitimates himself by combining Western notions of science and Eastern philosophy, and what he creates cannot be described as either in any sort of dichotomous sense. Instead, he has created something new and then branded it in a more simplistic and layered way to appeal to the American consumer. What needs to continue to be complicated in this social discourse of American yoga is where yoga comes from, how it is understood, and who it represents, and what, if any, are its boundaries of ownership. These boundaries also need to be recognized as fluid, as contextual, and with as many layerings of narrative as possible as part of a globalized social discourse. The consumption and reinvention of yoga in America for profit and purpose has implications also outside the American landscape. For instance, the trademarking of turmeric by the University of Mississippi in 1995 in part led to the Indian government's creation of the traditional digital knowledge library in 2001, which is made to protect Indian knowledge from being patented by others. And there's lots of debates we can think about, like Bikram's whole patenting his 26 series, postures of series, and all of these other things that are going on. But the idea is they're creating this traditional knowledge so that others can't just use it and take it and commodify it in any way that they'd like to. A further example of this ownership of narrative and display of power can be seen in the lifestyle brand of Lululemon. Lululemon is a yoga and athletic company started in 1998 by Chip Wilson. The company went public in 2007 and in 2008 sold $350 million worth of apparel in 113 stores. Lululemon has for many years been known for its quality of yoga pants and for its programs of yoga community building. The Lululemon brand creates a community surrounding notions of quality, health, wealth, and wellness. They sponsor weekly yoga classes such as Vino and Vinyasa or Flow and Joe, and they pay for their employees to attend yoga classes in the community. Lululemon also sponsors and recruits talent for major yoga festivals and events such as Wanderlust. At the same time, Lululemon is known to co-opt and trivialize yoga culture, display imperialistic views, to worship commodity, and to purposely exclude certain demographics. I offer an example. So I brought it with me too, so you guys can see it, but this is Lululemon's brahmacharya bag. The definition is on the side, but I'll also read it out to you guys. The side of the bag defines brahmacharya as moderation or non-excess. Quote, this yama, or yogic philosophy, teaches us to recognize the moment of just enough so we don't move past it into an uncomfortable excess. Maybe it is pushing away the plate of french fries or using pent-up energy for a run. By focusing inward, we keep our bodies healthy and energetic. And hey, there are some things we're better off avoiding altogether. Where in your life could you practice moderation? On the front of the bag, the word brahmacharya is spelled out in Cheetos, cookies, licorice, condoms, joints, cigarettes, alcohol, and even needles. This definition or redefinition and rebranding of previous notions and knowledges of brahmacharya, which we actually talked about in Brian's class earlier, which they would not recognize this as brahmacharya, right, Hannah? Do you think that the definition I just read would be similar to what you're reading in the Mahabharata? No, yeah, exactly. Not only disconnects it from the myriad traditions of yoga or Hindu philosophy, but may also offend those who take brahmacharya seriously. Maybe not even may, definitively probably offend those who take brahmacharya seriously. Overall, the topic of yoga in America is complicated, and I do not personally see yoga here as a black and white picture of good and bad. It is a hyper-real, a social discourse in transaction that is both creative and problematic in its inventiveness. I have taken classes with every teacher that was discussed here, and while I speak of them in terms of brands and consumption, I also find them to be knowledgeable, kind, and serious about their yoga practice. For example, Budig is a genuinely lovely person with a gift for making yoga both rigorous and entertaining, and Keena McGregor is incredibly well-versed in the history, philosophy, and anatomical alignments of Ashtanga and classical yoga. Because I see yoga as a social discourse, I would like to hear from you guys how those of you in the audience view American yoga. How does it operate today, and where do you see it going in the future? Furthermore, what do you think the visual media I have shown, the W Hotel ad, the Herbal Essence commercial, the Gandhi Does Yoga, have to say about yoga in America as a social discourse of profit and purpose? Is it all consumptive bodily display? Is it more? Can it be both?
We're going to take some questions now.
Yeah. Questions, comments, anything about the movies, the videos, anything?
So when we are looking at the yoga culture in the United States, it seems to be focusing on, let's say on the commercial aspect. Now, yoga practice in the United States is very diverse.
Very much,
you know, and it has been through ages. You know, and there has been this very rich stream of, let's say, interconnection of ideas. You know, so you have thorough reading Gita and
for sure.
Vedas and Water and Pond and everything, kind of bringing in that kind of philosophy. So I'm wondering if there are movements in the United States which focus on yoga as, let's say, on the spiritual aspect of yoga, and they just don't have a voice just because they are not, consumeristic.
Oh, definitely. There's a full spectrum of experience of yoga. There's definitely a lot of yoga teachers, a lot of yoga styles that are more focused on the spiritual side and very involved in the kind of philosophy and those aspects. For instance, Rod Stryker has his style of yoga called Para Yoga, and he's involved with Himalayan Institute. And in every class that he has, he speaks to Tantra or some sort of philosophical aspect, as well as doing the physical asana. And he actually, at Wanderlust a couple years ago, he gave a lecture where he basically was railing against the type of yoga that's happening. So it's a conversation that's very broad, and the more it seems to be, at least in my kind of research and my understanding, it seems to be in the American culture, people get into it for these kind of exercise ideas because this is how we understand in the commercialized aspect. But when they actually start to feel the yoga in their bodies and they feel the connections between their mind and the body, then they want to know more. And so it seems that yoga is moving, while it's still gaining traction in the commercial aspect, it's also moving towards people wanting to have deeper understandings. And the amount of people going to India for instruction and the amount of people even seeking me out, because I've been, in school for 14 years about this, it is definitely growing. And I'd say in the last, 5 years, I've had at least 20 students going to India because they want to know more and because they want to know where is this coming from and what am I doing here and how does it relate to what's going on over there. What's interesting is in India, too, when I went to India in this past September, a lot of the swamis and stuff are also wondering how they can better market to get Westerners to come practice in India as well. So it's a transactional thing. It's happening in dialogue rather than being kind of a one-way street.
So if you think of yoga in India, what is yoga essentially? Because see, the thing is that I grew up in the society, and you get a sense of what yoga is just because you are surrounded by a lot of practice.
Right.
But you never take time to conceptualize it and and explicate the idea. And because you have probably because you've studied it, so you have done that in a more structured manner. We talk a bit about how you think about yoga and how the Indian version of yoga, like the current Indian version of yoga, might be different from the way from the yoga that that was like the original yoga.
Right, yeah, it's interesting because, yoga in India is also, so Modi becoming prime minister is definitely changing the landscape of yoga in India as well. So he hired the first ever yoga minister for India, and he also has a relationship with Baba Ramdev, who's a very big, popular, highly marketed yogi in India, and he's on television and all of these things. And the perspective from that side is a more kind of nationalistic, let's take back yoga for India. Let's say that let's promote India or yoga from India, but let's let everybody know that this is India's gift to the world. While at the same time making sure through stuff like the traditional digital knowledge library and all of that, that we make sure whose ownership yoga is. And it seems like, because I interviewed people in both northern India and southern India about this, they said that, in the last 10 years, the physical practice of yoga is becoming more popular in India, whereas it used to be more just about the meditative side of yoga and the more philosophical side of yoga. So it wasn't about the physical asana there as much, or even, it was very little about the physical asana there. Whereas here, it's all about the physical asana, and then you trickle down to the other. Whereas there, it was all about the philosophy, and now it seems to be trickled down to, so it's kind of flipped.
Is the Ramdev yoga and other original people who brought yoga to the West, are they benefiting anything financially, like the?
Oh yeah, and it's always been involved in some sort of kind of monetary way too. It's like the spirituality and money have never been completely separate in anything. Even with temples and people going on pilgrimages, people made money by setting up stands for food around the temples or selling murtis or those ideas as well. So it's not that I'm just railing on America for, having a consumptive side. There's always been a consumptive side to religion and spirituality. It's just that it's so consumptive here. It's like it's taken to a whole other level in the American context.
Yeah, that's what I mean. To the extent West or America
exactly,
are benefiting are the ones who brought yoga in, say, in 60s or 70s. Are they still getting anything from them?
Oh, I mean, the Pattabhi Jois Institute in Mysore, recently they built themselves a new building. Sharat and his family have built themselves new homes. They made it nicer. A lot of the yoga studios in Mysore themselves, because there's so many Westerners going there and they're marketing to that kind of demographic, there's a lot of money being exchanged in general. And the benefits of those families that were part of that. Well, Iyengar just passed away. When was that? In September. And Iyengar, he definitely benefited financially, but his goal was still very much the practice or the dissemination of yoga from a physical aspect and not in the notion of making money. And in America, it's not necessarily that these people are like, I'm just in it for the money, but it's like that the conversation includes the money in America. We do not separate like what we do and our spirituality and all of that. Like you have evangelical pastors and stuff in America that are driving Mercedes-Benz and those kind of things as well. So it's not just in the yoga realm.
I thought this was interesting because when I started doing yoga when I was in high school, but I would go to like a vinyasa class, and it's not really spiritual at all. It was more just like a workout.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, I started becoming in love with yoga, but I had no idea that it was so much more than the whole. It was so like it's way more spiritual. So I got my yoga teacher training license in December, and I went to Shivananda ashram. And so it was like hatha yoga, and it was really, really slow. And so at first I hated it, and I was like, this is so slow, and this is nothing like yoga. Like we had to wear like white pants that were big and like t-shirts, and I was like, this is nothing that I thought it would be. But then as I went on, I really started to love it, and now I just started a yoga club, and like one day I want to open up a yoga studio, but I feel like in America everyone thinks it's like a workout, like yoga, like leggings kind of thing, and so I just don't know like how to like, get people to join and like do that without the whole commercial.
Right, the whole commercial aspect. And I mean, like I said too, I think the getting into yoga for exercise is still seeming to lead, like people like you. You went there, you had no idea that it had any spiritual connection, and then you ended up at the Shivananda ashram or the Shivananda school, and you ended up, learning a deeper perspective of yoga. So possibly, having different levels, like, okay, intro to yoga, maybe we talk about this, and then for more advanced practitioners, maybe bringing in more of the philosophy. Because it's also, I think for a lot of Americans, they're afraid of scaring off people by the spiritual aspect of yoga. So it's like you feel comfortable oming with your classes that are advanced or have been doing yoga for a few years, but you don't necessarily feel comfortable oming to people that it's like their first time in a yoga class. So it's hard, and it's like I love yoga. I think yoga's great, but I still think it's complicated and problematic that we don't include these types of things, but I don't know if I have a great answer for you about how to...
Because, like, my yoga practice didn't even, like, it got to a point before and then it just kind of stopped. And then once I went on this yoga retreat, like, I actually feel like I'm getting better and better. Right.
People want deeper. They want more dimensions to it. And that's what's wonderful about yoga, too, is there's so much to yoga, and there's always more you can learn, and there's always further reflection. There's always a deeper practice that you can get into, and it's not just like, great, I can now do handstand, but also that you can, find these philosophical texts. You can wrestle with them yourselves. More and more people are reading, texts like the Bhagavad Gita and stuff like that and trying to understand them in a way in which I feel maybe 10 years ago they would not have even thought about that. Yes, sir.
So we were talking a little bit about this earlier, and the take back Asim Shukla's, I find his columns to be very shrill, but I do think that he's speaking for a sizable amount of people.
For sure.
And yet, when you look at what's happening with yoga in India now in 2015, it is simultaneously being rebranded as an Indian idea, as a Hindu idea, except for when it's in public schools and then it's just exercise.
Right.
And they ask everyone to do a Surya Namaskar, the world's biggest Surya Namaskar, to celebrate the 150th birthday of Swami Vivekananda, who explicitly came to America to supplement our technology with the wisdom of the East. This was his stated intention.
Right, and he said that Hatha was basically a bad idea and nobody should do that part of yoga. It was all about the meditative side.
Yes, it's all true. And so I think that there's confusion, even in this attempt to purify. There is a deep-seated conflict that's not resolvable. I mean, you cannot have it both ways. I guess you can have it both ways if you're in power. You have all the seats in Parliament, but only for a little while can you have it both ways, and it still actually makes sense to people.
Right.
I'm wondering how that's going to resolve. I mean, to me, the yoga, it is not crested in the States yet, apparently. I thought it would 5 years ago.
So did I. No.
But I'm interested now, what do you think is going to happen in India? Whether or not it's going to end up being secular or Hindu.
Well, that's, interesting because they have the debate right now about yoga in schools in India, right? So wanting to have yoga in schools in India and whether or not in India it's a secular religious practice, and people in India being upset because there's, people in India that are not Hindu, and so Muslim parents and stuff of these children are saying, we don't want to have Hindu religious practice in our school system that is quote unquote secular. And with the whole kind of political climate, it's going to be very fascinating. There's also, I don't know if you guys know this, but Modi, in his first address to the United Nations, spoke about yoga in his very first address and proposed that we have an international yoga day. And 180 countries voted for it. So June 21st is actually the very first international yoga day in the world. And so yoga is not even just growing in the US and not just growing in India, but it's kind of growing as a global marketplace and a global practice. So I am incredibly fascinated to see, and the popularity of Baba Ramdev right now. I mean, he has hundreds of thousands of followers, and so what is that going to do for the promotion of yoga in India? And he's teaching, physical asana as well. So there's a lot of Indians who hadn't previously done physical asana that are now also practicing. And what way they're practicing and with what purpose they're practicing is not the same purpose or way that necessarily we are here, but it's also this kind of proliferation and dissemination of something called yoga. And yoga's never been just one term either, which is also, like as we were talking about earlier, in the very first notions of yoga in the Vedas was yoking to a chariot. And then it was yoking oneself to the chariot, the celestial chariots, to go above the sun to the heavens. And then it was yogis in the medieval period as basically these boogeymen. And the yogis would come, like we have the boogeymen here, the yogis would come take your soul. Because the yogis would practice supernatural things, and the yogis could be invisible, and the yogis could be, as small as atoms and as big as whatever. And then you had, after that period, you had a lot of yogis that were ascetic mercenaries that were hired by different various kingdoms as warrior yogis. Again, so we don't think about yogi. We think here about yogis as like a white woman sitting in a lotus position with her, outfit. But it's a very complicated, very complex term to begin with. And it's changing definitions even now, which makes it really fun to study.
So when we think about yoga, who invented yoga? Because now the ownership of yoga is
it's a big deal.
Such a thing, not only in the United States, but even in India.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So how do we think about yoga in terms of invention? Who owns it?
And that's also being debated. So if you go with the current political notion, it's a Hindu practice for Hindus, and it's India's gift to the world. But then you also have the fact that yoga was also being practiced by Jains. It was being practiced by Buddhists. It was being practiced. So in the colonial period, when the missionaries went over to India, there was often confusion between yogis and fakirs. So fakirs were Sufis, so they were Muslims. And so, it's who's doing yoga, who owns yoga, what is yoga? And that's why I think it's so contentious. Is because everybody wants to say, I own yoga, and I own my brand of yoga, or I own my style of yoga. And this is the authentic yoga lineage that I'm linking myself to. And it's whether you link it to the Yoga Sutras, whether you link it to Gorakhnath in the 10th century, whether you link it to, right now there's a book, I don't know if it got funded or not. It was being crowdfunded by some yoga scholars, James Mallinson and a couple other people, called The Roots of Yoga, that they were going to explore the authentic roots of yoga. And that's all great, except what authentic roots are we talking about? And bringing Tantra into it, and bringing all these other discussions, which are also yoga. And, you know, the physical practices of asana are mostly linked back to these tantric practices versus the Yoga Sutra practices that we think of. Because in the Yoga Sutras, there's really only 3 mentions of asana. Whereas the Hatha Yoga practices and the notions of stuff like chakras and kundalini and these ideas come out of a tantric perspective.
You know, when we think about yoga, at least, so like in India, the creation of knowledge or ownership of knowledge has been a pretty different thing than, you know, the Western model.
Right.
And when you think about it, and see, it's not that Western model doesn't have that, you know. So like the open source movement, if you look at, you know, softwares and everything, you know, the idea is that you create something and then open it to the world, and the world interacts with it and create something new. Mm-hmm. You know, Indian scriptures, the Vedas were essentially not one writer. They were just written over a long period of time. So do you think that yoga is, let's say, a cumulative thing, or accumulation of, let's say, physio-spiritual explorations, or is it like one person, you know, like the Steve Jobs who...
No, it's a layered thing. It's very complex. There's lots of narratives, and that's why I think it's important that we continue to complicate the conversation of what is yoga and who owns yoga and who is defining the yoga and why, you know? And, I mean, to say that there's one lineage, I mean, a lot of people quote that they go back to the Shiva seals and say that that's where yoga started, and that was, you know, 5th century BC, I believe, or whatever. But then there's a lot of other scholars and a lot of people that say these proto-Shiva seals are not having anything to do with yoga. So it's like you can link it to that, but you could be wrong. You can link it to something else, but you could be wrong. You could be right. It depends on who's doing the defining and what purpose they're defining it for. So it's complicated. It's very complicated.
On that note, let's give Christa another hand, and I think you'll stick around for a few minutes if you have any individual questions. Thanks again.
Thank you.